We hear a lot today about using blockchain for finance, for real estate, for many other applications. But what about for that very important area of voting, where we need security, we need to make sure it's available for everyone? There's pros and cons to it, and to find out the answers for you, I talked to a man who's written the book called Election Attitude, and he is the authority on blockchain and voting. His name, Dr. John Patrick. And the technology has really a lot of applications in many different areas. One of the areas that I'm fascinated about is voting. Because voting, we know there's a problem that's out there right now. You got two sides, it seems. One side says, oh, gee, we want everyone to vote, and we want to get the maximum amount of people registered and voting. The other side says, wait a minute, we got fraud that does happen, and we can't have too many people doing what they shouldn't do, et cetera. And the two often tend to conflict. But there's a way that we can solve both sides, and both sides be very happy, and that's using the technology. I wrote about that a little bit. I'm going to share my screen here with you and let you see what I wrote here. I wrote a particular little piece here about how to increase voter participation, eliminate fraud with blockchain, and I had that available in business journals. Well, what happened is when I wrote that piece, I had a delightful experience that a gentleman got in touch with me that you're seeing on the screen right now. His name is Dr. John Patrick, and he has written a book called Election Attitude. John, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, hello, Terry. Nice to be here to talk about an important subject.
Absolutely. It's really important, and I really appreciate what you've done. Matter of fact, you were kind enough to send me your book. Matter of fact, I'm going to share my iPad right now here. There it is. That's your book, The Election Attitude. And by the way, a very good book. I'm a tough, jaded journalist. You know, they teach us that in journalism. It'll be really tough on this. You've got an excellent book here, sir. I read it. I really enjoyed it. And I want to start with one of the quotes that you had here over on page 39. By the way, I love the way that they do this here as pages rather than locations. Really, really handy for that. Because you talk about a situation here to try to imagine e-commerce operating without a net attitude. I love the way you talk about with a net attitude, embracing that. For example, you want to buy something from a website, and the website sends you a letter with a password so you can log in after the item you want to buy. You click on it, and the website says, click here to request a printed catalog, and click here for the name and location of the nearest dealer who carries our product. You enter. Well, that would be nonsense to do it that way, and I appreciate what you're saying there, because right now it's far superior to use technology. Tell us a little bit about what you discuss in the book and what the idea of election attitude is all about.
Okay, well, thanks, Terry. I would love to do that. I think it's important to put this in perspective by starting out with the fact that in 2016 and back in 2012, in both of those elections, there were 100 million people who could have voted but did not vote. 100 million. So when we hear stories about fraud in Wisconsin and they do an audit and they find there were 312 votes that were not fraudulent, but there were human errors involved, it's nothing compared to 100 million people who could have voted who didn't vote. So why did those 100 million people not vote? And when I say the reason, I get booed usually. And I say the reason is because they couldn't get to the polls. And people's reaction typically is, no, that's not the reason. Of course not. The reason is they're lazy, or they're stupid, or they're apathetic. They don't care. They just, they're the reasons.
Yeah, and other kind words.
Other kind words, yeah. So there are some people in that category. One study said 10 to 15 million people would fit those descriptions, but most of the people, 85, 90, 95 million people could have voted but couldn't get to the polls. They couldn't get to the polls because of this ancient system we have. So the e-commerce example that you cited, yeah, that sounds pretty ridiculous. Well, if you were to describe to somebody how we vote on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, always on a Tuesday, why? Well, because that was done with deference to farmers 150 years ago, who respected the Sabbath. They didn't travel on that day. They needed a day to travel. That would be Monday, and so the election would be on Tuesday. And we still do it the same way. We use paper the same way we've always used paper. And a lot of people can't get there on Tuesday. They're sick. They're in the military out of the country. They got a last minute assignment from their employer. They had to go somewhere. They're taking care of their kids, taking care of their parents. There's a long list of reasons why people can't get to the polls. So that's why internet voting offers the possibility of improving our democracy to get a stronger voice, a more representative voice of a very large number of people in our country who today don't vote.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what you're talking about with the technology is good. Matter of fact, I can go back here and share a quote that you had from your really well-written and well-researched book, where you talk about the possibilities of using the technology that now we know exists. It's called blockchain, and it gives us the ability to view this and be able to ensure that we're going to have a much, much better result by using this new technology. Much like we use other tools right now, we know that we can do it. Here on page 47, you mentioned blockchain technology, the technology infrastructure which underlines digital currencies such as Bitcoin and others. Blockchain technology may be the ultimate solution to enable an election attitude to emerge. So tell us a little bit about blockchain and particularly how it relates to voting, how it can improve the process.
Well, blockchain is an infrastructure. It's a technology, is another way to think of it, which today makes possible primarily the exchange of digital currencies, such as Bitcoin. There actually are many digital currencies. Bitcoin is perhaps the most popular right now, but there are quite a few others. And the development of these digital currencies was made possible because of this underlying infrastructure called blockchain technology, which, by the way, has never been hacked. It's a fully encrypted capability. All the transactions are scrambled so that someone cannot read them. But most importantly about blockchain is that it involves a lot of people, a lot of servers connected to the internet. It's a distributed ledger. So the ledger, which keeps track of the debits and credits of cryptocurrencies, is stored on the server of all these different people that are part of the Bitcoin network, thousands of people. And they all have to agree. So when a transaction occurs, I send you 0.0375 Bitcoin, and that gets recorded in the blockchain. It then gets distributed to all the other people, and they don't see your name, they don't see my name, it's all encrypted. But it provides a consensus basis so that all the people, all these servers that are connected, they all have to agree. If one of them sees something different, they say, whoop, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this transaction.
That's
so
right.
That vision, instead of John sending Terry some Bitcoin, envision that John votes, Terry votes. We cast our vote, and that vote is stored in the blockchain. And if somebody tampers with it, which is what a lot of people legitimately are worried about, if somebody tampers with that vote, then the blockchain says, whoops, tilt, something's wrong here. We got to check out this vote. It may be tampered with.
Yeah.
So, very good technology for the purpose of voting.
Yeah, and I think what you brought up a point is very good. When you look at our technology today, we didn't have this years ago, say back in the 90s or so. Today, we do have blockchain. Came about through Satoshi Nakamoto, who was the pioneer, the one that wrote Bitcoin, whether it was a person or persons. We know that this technology was there. That was the first. Now we've perfected it to a point where it really is more reliable. And because you're using money, hey, people get real serious when it's money. It's not just an email that we're sending. If you didn't get the email, in most cases, we can keep trying something else. But if I say, here's $100 and I do not have it anymore, and I've given it to you, and you go, Terry, I never received your $100. Hey, that's a problem. And we know the same thing really with voting is there. Well, let me ask you a scenario, a hypothetical. I live in Florida, and I know occasionally you come down to Florida as well. So in 2000, Florida famously had problems with the election there, with George W. Bush and Al Gore. Suppose we could get in my time machine and we could go back to the year 2000, the election, and we're going to take blockchain technology with us so we could integrate it in there. How would blockchain technology have prevented the major whoops that happened during that election?
Well, the Florida election in 2000 had actually a lot of problems, which I would say actually bigger problems than the 537 votes that got George W. Bush elected. Of course, a lot of people say, well, actually, it was he won by 1 vote because it went to the Supreme Court, who voted 5-4. So he actually won by 1 vote. But the 537 votes, that showed the frailty of using punch cards and chads. And it was such a mess that people began to develop a whole new vocabulary called chadology.
Yeah, exactly.
Chads and all kinds of chads. But to me, the more important thing was that in Palm Beach County, during that election in Florida, there were almost 20,000 people who voted for George W. Bush and Al Gore. They voted for both. And they voted for both because the ballot was so confusing. This paper ballot, they called it a butterfly ballot. It opened up like this, and it had a set of holes that you could punch down the middle, and some people were confused. They were smart enough to know who they wanted, but they weren't used to this kind of voting. They got confused, and they voted for both by accident. 20,000 votes. So yeah, 537 made the difference. But from a technological point of view, and this to put in perspective how ancient the system was, more important is those 20,000 votes. Now, fast forward to 2016. In Florida, again, where I'm a voter, a lot of people vote absentee. How do you vote absentee? You fill out a ballot, same as 150 years ago. You put it in an envelope, and then you put that envelope in another envelope, and you sign the back of that envelope with your name. If you sign improperly, or let's say you forget to sign, or if you sign with a scribble, and the voting people look at that scribble, and then they look at the driver's license database, and they say, these don't match. That vote doesn't count. 200,000 votes in Florida in 2016 fell into that category. 200,000 people were
200,000.
200,000. They were disenfranchised because of our ancient system.
Wow. That's a strong case for blockchain.
It's a strong case for, let's figure out, okay, blockchain's not completely, let's say, adapted for voting, but it could be. And instead of spending our energies attacking what's wrong with our voting system, let's figure out how to make it work, because we know it's a really solid technology, especially if we combine it with these amazing new supercomputers we all carry around with us. And
yeah, exactly. We've got it. We're very familiar with using our smartphones now. It's quite common, and we accept the technology for many areas. However, there are those that are well knowledgeable, very studied and learned in the area of that, and they say, well, now, wait a minute. You're dealing with computers, and there's always a chance for fraud. And there's always a chance something could go wrong. And they're concerned, I think, for legitimate voting. They want to make sure that things are done right. What would you say to those people who are very sincere, but they're saying, we can't use blockchain, we can't use this, we still need to go with the old paper method, it's more reliable?
Well, I think that from a high-level perspective, what I would urge people such as you described to think about is, how should we compare the voting by the internet to a perfect system, which they like to talk about, a perfect system. There's no Windows 95, there's no viruses, we redo the internet, we redo Windows, we redo everything and make it perfect. Well, that's just not going to happen. One thing we've learned over the last 25 years is that the internet and computers evolve. You don't rip out all the Windows computers and replace it with some new kind of a computer. It just doesn't happen that way. So comparing internet voting to a perfect system, which we will never have, is wrong. We should compare internet voting to the system we have, which is terrible, and it disenfranchises a lot of people. We have to continuously remind ourselves 100 million people could have voted who didn't. That's a lot of people.
Yeah, that is. I think you raise a very good point. As a matter of fact, I want to go back here and take a look again at your book where you address that very, very issue, very important, that I think that we need to look at this. And John, I want to take a look here at what you say in your book. I think it's so appropriate where you say it will take time. People have to be comfortable and confident in the system they use. Candidates will also need time to adopt a new way of thinking, and every election has multiple candidates, and each of whom is sure they're going to win. When the election is over, the losers will be quick to challenge the voting system as the reason for their loss. Ultimately, voters and candidates will realize the blockchain will lead to fair and honest elections, something we can all agree with, because the power of the blockchain ledger will ensure all votes are counted correctly and cannot be altered. That's important. The result is an honest and fair election. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think you raise a very good point that if we're trying for perfection, well, it just doesn't happen on this planet, at least not yet. Maybe they'll hit it someday, but we're not there yet. But I think if we compare it to where we are right now with 200,000 people just in the state of Florida, just in the last election, that are disenfranchised, we need to do something. Tell us about the time frame on that and what we need to consider.
Yeah, well, at first, those words that you read were not my words. They were the words of Mike Shamus.
Thank you.
Who is at the University of Pittsburgh, or Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh, rather. He doesn't feel that blockchain is ready to implement right now in 2017 or 2018. But as you read his words, there's no doubt in his mind that we can have a more fair election process if we use blockchain technology. It has not been hacked. It's a great way to store votes. And instead of attacking it and highlighting all the reasons why it isn't good enough just yet, let's say, well, what are the 10 things we need to do so that it will be good enough, so that in 2020, we can have a different kind of election. We can enfranchise a lot of those 100 million people, and we can strengthen our democracy as a result.
Absolutely. I agree with you. And matter of fact, as we're recording this, we're coming to the end of 2017. Next year, 2018, there will be midterm elections and a lot of other very important elections throughout the land. One of the thoughts I had as I was reading your book, again, great book, and those of you watching this, I encourage you to look into it. Dr. Patrick did a wonderful job going in depth on this, studying many issues, being fair, looking at other examples. And I see we've got an opportunity right now as we're going into these. I like the way that you said, I wrote it down here, your idea of thinking big, acting bold, start simple, and iterate fast. What a beautiful concept, good in elections as well as many other areas of life too. But zeroing in on that start simple, it would seem like, I want to get your comments on this. Start simple, let's try a few mock elections where we use blockchain. We just say, hey, we're going to use the real candidates here, but if the election is in November, we're going to do this just as a test that doesn't count in July. I'm just pulling some dates at random here. We do a test and we see how it performed and what it did. And why not start using it at a local level? Maybe for a city commissioner or something like that. Do a lot of testing. We'll want to change and iterate. What are your thoughts on doing something like that in 2018?
Yeah, well, there's no reason we can't do that. There actually have been tests of internet voting, not with blockchain, but with other internet technologies. It's been done in Utah, it's been done in Arizona, it's been done for the Department of Defense. There have been a handful of pilots. West Virginia was another. They were successful. There were not security issues. Customer satisfaction or voter satisfaction was extremely high. 90+% of the people said, this is great, we should always vote this way.
How about that?
The provinces, the communities across Canada, they're adopting internet voting. Now, admittedly, there's a lot less risk in a small town of 10,000 people voting for a mayor or the dog catcher than there is the voting for the president. And this is what people are worried about. But I think, Terry, an important point of this whole story of internet voting that we have to keep in mind is that in America, there is no voting system. And the media has sort of mischaracterized the whole subject of hacking and the Russians and tampering and fraud. First of all, nobody's brought forward any numbers proving that there was fraud. In my research, I couldn't find any evidence of it. I found a lot of stories about it, a lot of anecdotal stories, but I couldn't find any real numbers, real evidence. The other thing is that the Constitution in America gives the responsibility for voting to the 50 states. The states, in turn, delegate to counties, and we have over 3,000 counties in America. That's where things happen, and that's where the grassroots should begin. That ultimately will be what leads us to blockchain voting. Exactly as you said, an experiment, a trial in a county, in a state. And when that's successful, then another county will adopt it. And then maybe the state will say, wow, this worked great in 2 of our counties, let's adopt this statewide. So it's going to take a little time for this grassroots idea to catch on, but the federal government should be encouraging it. They should be encouraging it.
Absolutely.
They can't demand how voting gets done in Florida. No, Florida has that responsibility. It will not be taken away from them without a change of the Constitution, which is not going to happen.
Yeah.
The federal government could encourage. They could point to things that work. They could point to things that don't work, and really actively promote and encourage advancement of technology, like they have done in many other areas. Like, for example, the internet. Without the federal government, we wouldn't have an internet. That was Defense Department money that led to this wonderful thing that we have today. We should take that same approach with voting.
I think you're absolutely right, sir. And what you're doing is very important. Those of you that are watching this, think about this. We have a way to really alleviate and remedy a lot of problems that we all have derided for years. We have a technology now. It's called blockchain. I like your idea of the small iterations. I think, for instance, I know from my work in teaching this and working with people, if I were going to send you, let's say, a large sum of money, for whatever reason, I needed to send you, let's say, $10,000. That's a lot of money to me. Am I going to send that in Bitcoin? What I would want to do first is send you $1, maybe $2. And I want to see, okay, did it go through properly? Did you get the $2 there? Oh yeah, it came through just fine. Then we might say, let's try $20. Okay, we do it, but we would gradually move up there. Wouldn't have to do a lot, but that iteration that you talked about is important. And I think right now, at this time in history, we can do it. It starts with those of you watching this, writing to the people that are in your district that are in charge of this, saying, hey, we've heard about, we'd like you to try this blockchain. They say, well, we don't know about it. Well, here's a book you might want them to refer to called Election Attitude by this wonderful guy right here sitting next to me, virtually on the screen. That is Dr. John Patrick. Dr. John Patrick, thank you so much for being with us today. Before we let you go, any final words that you have? And also, how can people get in touch with you? How can they get hold of your book, this one, and as well as other books that you have?
Yeah, great, Terry. Thanks for those comments. Let me just quickly make note of the fact that back in the early 90s, when the internet was in its infancy, there were a lot of people that said this isn't going to work. And people, in fact, some people at IBM where I work were PhDs in computer science, and they were certain that what the internet could never be able to do transactions. It was interesting to read documents, but you could never possibly buy something on the internet. And these weren't dummies. These were really smart people. So we have the same thing today with regard to voting. We just have to get an attitude change. And that's what Election Attitude is all about. You can reach me at john@johnpatrick.com. You can find the book in Kindle or print on Amazon. Just go to johnpatrick.com and you'll see a picture of it there, along with my other books that involve attitude.
Very good. All right. Well, sir, thank you so much for being with us. And for those of you watching this, take action. This is important. Look into it. Find out what's available. Get the book. It's a great read. It'll give you an in-depth knowledge on what's available. And here's an idea. Get 2 copies, one for you and one for the people that are in charge of elections in your district. It has to start at the grassroots level. Let's talk about ways of remedying these problems. Instead of complaining about it, here's a way for you to actually do something. Reporting for Business Journals and for TerryBrock.com, I'm Terry Brock. Thank you for joining us today.